All right, so I'm going to kick off. I know time is precious at the moment for everybody. Now, what I'd love for you guys to do during this session is obviously there's a chat feature in Zoom. So if you want to just put in any questions or comments, share them to everybody, share them to me. Don't really mind. I will leave that chat open. That just helps me address any questions as they pop up. I'll keep an eye on that. All right, so what we're trying to do is give you some confidence with your readbacks. It's not like you just finish the 2-day course and you walk away going, yeah, I'm going to ace these readbacks. They're easy. And it's always the feedback around, oh, it's the challenging piece, right? Writing it down is a skill in itself, and then actually verbalizing and delivering it is another. So what I wanted to show you was just some really key elements to the formula to getting it right, or to have some really good building blocks in place. And like I was asking Gary earlier around how many have you done since training, the key thing is really setting yourself a goal and thinking about who do I want to do readbacks with in my first sort of 30 days after doing training. And usually we would recommend that those are family, friends, or really close colleagues, maybe people you've worked with for a long time. Not necessarily your direct reports, but people you just know really well and go, hey, can I just practice this on you and see how it feels? That just builds your confidence, and practice really does help build that readback muscle. The other thing is when you're doing a readback, often we go, okay, we're doing a readback, and we don't actually rewind and go, okay, what is the purpose of me doing this readback? Have I really stopped to think about, Gary, you gave the example earlier, it was a way to introduce a new manager to their team as a real get to know you. So that's the purpose of that conversation. So I'd say that that's probably about just high level get to know you. So you may even want to frame that. So, you know, we're going to go through your results today. The purpose of this is for, you know, this manager to get to know you and what drives you and what motivates you, and vice versa. We'll probably share the manager's results with you so that you guys can really work out how to work best together. That's a great purpose. So you've got to set the frame as well. Sometimes it might be, look, we want to talk to you about your results in the dialogue and in the frame of talking about, you know, maybe a role for you and where, you know, we've been talking about your role and where you want to go from a career progression perspective. Let's work out what drives you and what motivates you, and then let's talk about what type of roles you might really enjoy in the business. So that might be another way to frame it up. You might want to talk about coaching. So it might even be, look, we know that you've been maybe having some challenging relationships. Let's talk about your profile, but now let's start to talk about the profile of that person you're dealing with. So you can actually do readbacks in a range of different contexts. And a readback doesn't always have to be you just do it once. So in those examples, there might be a time when, you know, someone got their readback a year ago, but you might go, oh, there's a new manager here. Let's revise and let's revisit your profile results and share them with the manager. So they may have got their results a year ago, but they're going to go through them again in the context of sharing and getting to know the other person. You might go through those results again in a career coaching conversation. You might revisit it. It might not be a big hour-long readback, but it might be a quick, let's revisit your profile. What drives you? What motivates you? What are the key parts in your profile? And let's talk about a career opportunity for you. So you can actually bring a readback into the work context actually quite a lot. There's a lot of opportunities to do that. Or might be something else totally different. But again, when you're the one delivering the readback, provide purpose. It might be, we're preparing you for an event that we're doing with the leadership team. We just want you to revisit and just refresh your mind in terms of what drives and what motivates you. Because again, remember, we think about only taking a profile behavioral assessment once. We don't ask people to reset it, but that doesn't mean you can't revisit your own profile and check in and go, oh yeah, that's right. That's what drives me. That's what motivates me. And it gets really, really interesting the deeper someone understands their profile. Getting it once is just sort of the tip of the iceberg. They go, oh, wow, that's insightful. But every time you sort of go through it, they're going to learn more and more. Like in training, when you guys all actually got to unpack your profiles, think about the fact that most of you got a readback from me before training. Then during training, revisiting somebody's profile can give them more deeper level of insight. Preparation is really key for these things. And what we always recommend you do is have a look at that person's profile. And the first thing I always do when I pick up a PI is I look at the M. I look at the M factor and I look at how many words did they select. And a good example is I sent out an assessment to somebody the other day and I knew preemptively that this person had quite bad dyslexia. And they even told me, oh, I don't really like taking those type of tests because I'm dyslexic and I just get very confused. When I checked the results, the M response rate was 18 and they'd only actually selected 6 words in that self. And we know that 6 is the bare minimum before the tool gives you an error. It says you must select more words. So there's a good chance that that might not be an accurate readback because the response rate was so low. So it's always the first thing I do. And then I've got to go back and check in with that person. How did you find it? How did you perceive it when you took it? Did you rush it? Did you read all the words? Just check in with them because there could be a situation where they've taken it in the wrong language and they might need to retake it. We always start with the factors, you know, the furthest from the midpoint. We're going to go through this today. The factor combinations, then we do the E factor, M factor, we kind of always do at the beginning, and then self-concept shift. So they're always the 5 things we look at. When you get into present mode, these are just some little tips for you. So it's really hard because we're so excited about A, B, C, D to not talk about it. So often when I'm listening to other people, they're like, oh, and your high A means that you, and I'm thinking, they don't know what high A means. They don't know what low B is. They just want to understand what do they like at work. So they don't really necessarily need to understand, you know, drives, motivating needs, behaviors. You may want to get there at the end when you start to do some education and coaching. But at the beginning, that's not what you need to do. Avoid pointing at the graph. So sometimes we might have those results sitting in front of us. And if you have them out on the table, what happens is often they're like, oh, what is this squiggly line? What does that mean? That says independent. Am I low independence? It can sometimes create more confusion. So sometimes I usually bring those out at the end. So if I want to actually get into education coaching mode, I will do it at the end. I do the readback up front, just verbally talking it out, reading my notes. And then at the end we go, okay, now let's deep dive into what this means and use it in the context. Let's have a look at your profile in comparison to someone else's. Keep it conversational. So try and put it in context, use examples. And that's where people go, oh yeah, that is what I'm like. Yeah, in a meeting or to get my best ideas or when I'm building relationships or if I'm going to an event, or these things really help. Now you guys have the best insight here because you are at work with these people. For us as external, we don't understand their work context as much. You're able to add a little bit of flavor there that can add context, but don't overcook it. Don't take your own observations that can be sometimes a bit biased and use that as a way to give them feedback. So try and avoid doing anything that might be negative towards the person. But if it's in a positive way, so what I have noticed in meetings is you often do sit back and listen and observe, and you'll never be the person that speaks the most. But when you do, you can tell that you've really thought through what you're going to say. Now, that's a really positive way to frame that rather than, yeah, I've noticed you never speak up in meetings. It's just a way of how you can position something so that person feels really understood, heard, and in a positive way. Don't use the readback, especially in the first instance, to deliver performance feedback. You might, down the track, after you've sort of already done a positive readback, and you might be doing coaching and you go through the profile for coaching. But again, you framed it up in a sense that the purpose of this meeting for you and I is to give you some feedback and to coach you on your performance. And this is a part of your coaching plan. I want to give you some feedback over some of my observations in the past month and talk about how we can help you and coach you through those things. That would be okay to say, I've noticed in meetings that you hold back. And I probably can tell it's from your profile. And that's really what drives you and what motivates you. How can we help you build your confidence? Now, that's a different way than you never speak up in meetings, right? And that directness. So again, giving that person context is really important. Stop and check in. Don't just read your notes like crazy, blah, 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 and then get to the end and go, how was that? Because they'll go, oh, that thing you said at the beginning, I can't remember what it was, but it didn't feel right. And so then you sort of have to rewind. So it's really important to check in after each section. You know, how does that sound? Can you think of a time when that happened? Does that resonate with you? Is there an example at work that you can think of where that's been relevant or that's got some context? That's a really great way to keep the dialogue flowing. And use positive language. You all know that from when you come to training with me, that there's this level of strengths-based. This is all about people's strengths. There's no right or wrong. The challenge is for all of us is we all have perception of things and whether they're good and bad. And that's just a bias we all walk around with. We all need to call it. Some people go, oh, I don't like working with really dominant people. They're so aggressive and they're so this. And you'll have a negative connotation around certain profiles, depending on, I don't like working with really low patient people. They're just so rushed. I think they're really disorganized. Well, okay, let's talk about the strength there of them, their level of proactivity, and they like variety. And it's about positioning things really positively for that person. And you've just got to, I always say, keep your bias to yourself. Your job is to go through these results as a very neutral person and say, this is what I can see from your results. I've just got a few opening lines for you as well. And guys, just checking in with you. If you've got any questions, observations, make sure you put them in the notes and we'll pause and have a conversation if we need to. So with the open, I've got a few examples of how to open. Now on our Readback prep form that you've all got, and I'll resend out to you all, we have a bit of an intro line, but there's lots of variety in terms of how you might open. We always love to talk about what it is. So you can see all three of these say the PI behavioural assessment. So that's how we always refer to it. It's the Predictive Index behavioural assessment, measures, or it looks at, we always say workplace related behaviours. That's our go-to line because it's simple and easy to understand. You might want to say it's what drives you, what motivates you at work. We've got 3 patterns that we look at. I try and avoid the top Readback piece unless they're already fairly educated on PI, because they'll go, oh, self-concept. Sometimes you get people a bit mixed up and confused. It makes sense to us, but not to them. The second one here I actually really like. It helps us understand a person's needs and behaviors. It's a snapshot of that individual, I would say, at work, who they naturally are and who they're trying to be to adapt to their environment, and what we can observe in their behavior based on what drives them. So you can see here, and then the last one gives you some context. So what do we see from a PI? We look at the amount of someone's drive to control, to interact with people, their need for change, and their need for rules and structure. They're the 4 factors. I mean, I'm sure hopefully you can see that they're the 4 factors that we look at. But we know there's heaps more insight we get in terms of all the factor combinations as well. So there's a variety of opens for you. Again, providing that purpose and then an open line, and then jumping into what I can see from looking at your results is, and then you'd start. We have refreshed our behavioural assessment Readback forms. We're going to provide you with a copy of that, obviously after the end of this webinar. It'll also be on Basecamp, on the website Basecamp, so you can go in and download it. As we refresh it, we'll always update the website. And this is just a way for you to start breaking it down. You might create your own form, feel free, but we'd love for you to work through the structure. So there's always a flow. Now, let's do one together. It's nothing like practicing. Now, I would love for somebody to tell me, we always start with the furthest factor from the midpoint. Who wants to tell me what the furthest factor from the midpoint is? I could hear someone very...
D?
B.
B, correct. So B is actually the furthest if you were to count them. Where is my little thing? There we go. B is the furthest from the midpoint. And we know that the B is the extroversion drive, the drive to for social interaction at work. The next is D. So then the next furthest from the midpoint is D. So you would start to talk about their low drive for rules and structure. We do behaviours and needs. So if you have a look, I always say page 6 and 7, our behaviours and needs, that's where we start. So you would say, look, if we were to do the high B is where we start. What I can see from looking at your results is in terms of what drives you at work is you're an outgoing person. You love building connections with other people. You love to talk out an idea. You probably come across as quite enthusiastic and persuasive. And for you, you really like to have an opportunity to influence and to build relationships. So, and you like an opportunity to work with and through other people. So I've just done my high B behaviours and then my high B needs. And I've just sort of blended the behaviours and then gone into needs. You can see there's other things. There's public recognition, visual signs of accomplishment. You probably like the visual recognition, the verbal thank you. You like those type of interactions. And then we would do the low D. So we would say, well, we would check in with like, how does that sound? Does that sound like you? And by the way, they're high B, so they're going to be talking to you, right? They are going to be the few people that actually have a chat with you very, very consistently. And then when we move into the low D, then we would say, look, and the other thing is that you are a fairly informal person. You're quite relaxed and casual, spontaneous, and very adaptable. You deal well with ambiguity. So even when all the rules aren't there, you can navigate through that quite confidently. So you like freedom from rigid structure. You don't like someone to really force you to tick every box. You like to sort of get there your own way. And ideally, you should be able to delegate the detail part of your role if you've got people around you to do that. You like an element of flexibility, even maybe when it comes to coming to work at exactly 9 o'clock, you probably like some flexibility, right? You're not a clock watcher yourself. It's more about the outcome for you. And you like to have some space to be spontaneous and potentially even creative in some of your ideas. So again, I've just gone through the low formality needs on page 6. I've just sort of gone tick, 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 quite conversationally. Who wants to tell me the next furthest from the midpoint? A, lovely. So, how does that sound? Does that resonate with you? The other thing is, you're naturally a very cooperative person. Now I'm on page 7, just going through the low A behaviors, right? And because it's moderate, I'm just going to do it moderately. You're naturally a cooperative person. You are very accommodating of others, naturally really supportive of your colleagues and team members, and very harmony seeking. You do not like conflict. You're probably going to avoid it if you can. And we often say you're more likely to say yes than no, and then work out how you're going to say no later. Not always the case, but you might find that you're very service driven by nature. So what you need at work, as we switch into needs, what you need as work is a really harmonious environment, a low conflict environment, lots of encouragement and understanding, that real more understanding environment. You like team recognition. So it's not always about you. It's actually, if we're going to recognize the team, that's going to motivate you. It's not about your goals. It's about how can we all get there together. And on motivating needs, you can see it says freedom from individual competition, right? And that's where I talk about, it's about team recognition and team getting there together. And lots of opportunities to collaborate. You mix that with the fact that you've got a high social drive. You want to talk things out, get into a team discussion, and probably whiteboard it. Let's all get in a room and talk about it. So see how I'm just giving you some really simple little examples that's help painting the picture about what life is like at work for this person. And then the last one is C. And it's very close to the midpoint. It's not touching the midpoint, but definitely this person's only going to be quite moderate in their patient drive. Borderline moderate, like in terms of situational, they might cross. So I wouldn't want to go really hard and say, you're the calmest person in the room and you need a huge amount of process. I wouldn't go extreme on any of the patient drive because it's so moderate. The A is a little bit different because it's certainly like 4/5 away from the midpoint. When it's only like 1.5, like, which is what this is, it's going to start to be quite situational. So we would say, look, in terms of how much variety and pace you need at work, there'll be times when you like to do things quite systematically, process driven. You'll like a little bit of consistency at work, the familiarity piece. And so you'll come across as fairly consistent and peaceful. But there might be other times when you actually just step up the pace and urgency and you do like to multitask. So for you, you kind of like a little bit of both depending on what's going on for you. Does that sound about right? And then see where that conversation takes you. So that's how you do the 4 factors first. So we do the furthest, second, third, fourth, and we just talk about what that means, what the drive is. Well, less about the drive, but what are the behaviors and what are the needs there? So what do they need at work? They're going to go, oh, gee, that's so good. And you're like, you're going to tell them you've only just got started because we know that now we're going to shift into factor combinations. Who can tell me what the widest factor combination is?
D.
Yay, I've got a B over D on my chat channel. Awesome. B over D. Great. Now, nothing like our toolkits. You know how much I love our toolkits. Our little blue toolkits are the people data. Mine's starting to get very coffee stained. So the section I really like to go to is pages 18, 19, and 20 in our toolkit. And the reason why I like this section is because it actually breaks it down into each factor. These are when it crosses the midpoint, disclosure, only when it crosses the midpoint. And it gives you a work context. So if we do B over D, what it says here is informal. And then it breaks it down into providing direction, sharing ideas, and delegating. So it takes all that hard work away for you. You can then just start to put it into context. So when it comes to providing direction to others, maybe your team member, you are a big picture person. You're very comfortable talking at a high level, maybe about ideas and big picture and the intangible. When you share ideas, you've got less of a filter to you. So you probably share everything that comes to mind, and you like to process out loud. Now, not all of your ideas are fully baked. So people can't just take every idea you've had and go, yes, that's brilliant. We've got to sift through all those ideas because you're a big idea generator in the sense that you want to verbalize them. When you want to delegate, delegating is easy for you. You naturally and quickly trust others, which you might want to explore, by the way. Sometimes when I debrief people and they go, yeah, and I've been a bit burnt before. So sometimes this is a good opportunity to talk through, naturally you are quick to trust. It's a wonderful quality. How is that played out in the work environment? It's a great discussion you can have there. Next is B over A is the next widest. So we go to B over A. And this is task or people orientated. A over B, B over A. So B over A being more people orientated. High social drive, low dominance drive. So in terms of like how you want to communicate at work, is you're more empathetic. It's probably more emotive driven, wanting to connect with people, maybe even more deeply. And you naturally are more social beast, right? You just like to engage with others. When you delegate authority, we actually talked about delegating earlier in the informal. Like we said, delegating is pretty easy for you. That quick to trust, you naturally share, and you delegate easy, especially if it's around the details, right? Because they've got a low D. Problem solving, very collaborative. So when you're solving a problem, you want to put people in a room. You want to get in front of a whiteboard and share every idea possible and get everybody on board before you move forward. Decision making it's going to be about consensus. Because you're such a high team orientated person and very selfless, it's not about you. The decision making for you needs to have consensus. You want everybody on board, and it has to be people orientated. Like, have we thought about how this decision is going to impact people? So that's how we would do the B over A. Who wants to tell me the next one?
C over D.
Beautiful, Nula. Beautiful. C over D. It's almost a bit tricky to do that one. When I looked at it, I was like, oh, what's the next one? I had to think twice on that one. Casual with the rules. So let's do C over D. And again, I'm just flicking through the book at this point. Casual with the rules. So when it comes to following and enforcing rules, rules are a bit of a guideline for you. And you've got a pretty patient and relaxed approach to rules. And they'll go, yeah, rules are for dummies. I want to operate outside of the rules. Working with structure. Structure is a guide. And you're comfortable with ambiguity. And where I really make this a positive is, especially with dealing well with ambiguity because of the low Ds, I say, look, there might be a project at work where all you've got is an idea. Now, where other people need to come in and have a really clear structure or a really clear, here are the 10 steps you need to follow, your strength is you can take a big idea and kind of work out what's next without a lot of structure. So you might find that they throw you into ambiguous situations and you don't mind that you kind of thrive in not having too much of a rigid structure to follow. They will always go, oh my God, yes, like 100%. So again, giving it that context will make them go, oh yeah, that's happened. Or they'll give you a better example, right? I love it when people give you a better example. Working with structure, we've done that. Dealing with deadlines. Deadlines are pretty negotiable for you. So whilst, you might want to get to the goal, the deadline can flex if it needs to, right? But you will be persistent. So that high C makes them persistent. So they will get there in the end, whether they hit the deadline or not is another thing. And you will stick with something until the result is achieved. So you might be more persistent sometimes than your colleagues. You will keep at something. Again, ask them to give you some context. Who wants to tell me the next one? The cross is the midpoint.
C over A.
Was that C over A, Tanya?
Yeah, cross is the midpoint. C over A.
Beautiful, beautiful. C over A. Let's do AC, our proactive or responsive drive. So C over A is more responsive, page 18. How do they respond to pressure? So in terms of how you respond to pressure, like that extreme intense pressure, pretty tentatively and with caution. You might sort of ask, well, why? And let's think about this. Again, thinking more from how's this going to impact the team? When it comes to dealing with change and significant change, it takes you time. You're never going to be the first person leading the charge on change. You will be the person asking why. Why are we doing this? Once you understand the why and also how it's going to impact everyone else, remember they're low A, then you'll get on board. You're also the best person to implement change because of how you can think through from other people's perspective. You're a little bit calmer, more patient around things. You don't rush through the change like some other change initiators. You're more a change implementer. And that's really important to understand the difference there. So when you take action, it will be more careful. So again, if you're rolling out change or implementing change, you're more careful, more considered. And the wonderful strength you have is because of all of this, you listen well. You're calm, thinking about the other person, and you're more likely to just stop, reflect, and listen. Disclosure for the group. Look how high their B is. So what you find is you might not want to go too high on how well this person listens because they love talking, right? That high social drive you're going to find, especially because it's like very high. Other people might go, not think this person listens very well. I would say they've got a natural tendency to listen well. Whether they tap into that because of that high social drive or not is another thing. So these are the things that, again, this is why we do base camp. It's like accelerator. What other things should you be looking at? Whilst this just says they listen well, once you couple that with a really high B drive, let's think about maybe that's not always the case. It can if they want to, but maybe not always the case. All right, our 5th factor combination. Oh, thank you, Deb. We've got B over C on chat. B over C on the high side. Now, when we have something that doesn't cross the midpoint, in our toolkit, we just go back a few pages. So 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. We've got all these pages with our 6 factor combinations. So B over C is on page 15, if you're following along. B over C, both high. So it says here, warm, open, and very talkative. So again, how you communicate is you're warm, open, very talkative. You will be proactive when it comes to building your relationship. So you might even step outside, you know, go and chat to that new person in the team. You will go out and do those things. And you'll do that in a fairly steady and calm way. You got to remember that C isn't really, really low. It's still up just slightly on the high side. Focus, listening, and willingness to share. So again, in terms of how they converse with someone, they will listen, but they'll also want to share. It's not just all listening. It's like, yeah, listening and in manner. And you're focused on social matters rather than things and tasks. So again, more socially driven. And the last one, who wants to tell me the last factor combination?
A over D.
A over D, beautiful, thank you. Now, we always talk about how important A over D is, that risk piece. It's almost the first thing I always look at in someone's profile is where's their A over D? Now, what's interesting is that A is over D, but both low. So remember, we've got to go to our risk page 22 and 23. Now, we would say A and D both low. There's a little thing here that says A and D both low. Low drive to control the decision and low drive to get it right. Very little buildup of tension. You know how we talk about A as the accelerator on risk and D is the brake, right? So they have very low accelerator and very low brake. There's just not a lot going on when it comes to risk. So we would say, look, when it comes to risk at work, it's not really a priority for you. If risk comes along, it's just probably not overly exciting for you. It's just not a priority. You don't really want to be the person controlling the risk. You don't really want to be the one controlling the outcome either. You've got bigger focuses at work. Is probably what I would say to someone with a risk profile where both is low like that. Any questions over that one in particular? Because people get a little bit, the risk when they're both low is, we all know when they're both high over the top of each other, we know that's analysis paralysis. This is kind of like, not interested, don't care. Whereas the other person wants to do the risk, but they want the break. So there's like a lot of build-up of tension there, right? Because they want to do it, but they're not quite sure. They're like a lot of brake and a lot of accelerator going on. This person's got nothing going on when it comes to risk. Who knows what we go to next? M. Very good. We do definitely look at the M. I love to look at the M at the beginning as well, and just have a look at it. Again, at training, I would have told you, look, we used to talk about energy levels and their response rate has an impact on energy. We don't really debrief on that anymore. I would say, look, they've done 20, 24, pretty consistent there. At a 44, there's probably nothing to overly focus on. The next thing we like to do is self-concept. Now, I've actually probably done this in the wrong order because we do like to talk about the E factor, but I'm going to do that last just in this instance. So now we need to talk about self and self-concept shift. What's going on in terms of, well, that's you. That's who you are. Awesome. Now let's, things are causing you to feel like you might have to adapt because of your environment? Who wants to tell me what's had the biggest shift? And remember, it's more than 1 sigma. Has to move more than 1 sigma. What's moved more than 1 sigma?
He has.
B.
And it's across
Awesome.
the midline.
Beautiful, Tanya. Awesome. The B has come down 1.5 sigmas, and to your point, it actually has crossed the midpoint. So we would say, look, we talked about the fact that you're a social being, you love to build those relationships and talk out your ideas. But we can see that you perceive a need to be maybe less of that, and maybe less persuasive, less talking things out, maybe a little bit more quieter and sitting back. What's going on for you right now? What might be causing that? See what they say. Again, no assumptions. Is your boss telling you to shut up and sit in the corner? Don't say any of that. Just tell them exactly what you see. Now, we know the self-concept change in your toolkit is page 29, and it even has some wonderful little openers. So you perceive a need to be, you are trying to be, you feel a need to be. Again, that's how they're adjusting based on their environment. Who wants to tell me the next factor that's shifted? Awesome. I had somebody on chat say D. Lovely. And that's also across the midpoint. So it's moved just slightly less, but it's definitely more than 1 sigma, and it's crossed the midpoint. So we talked about the fact that you're a pretty free-flowing person, fairly relaxed and casual with rules and structure. But what we can see is based on your environment, is you're perceiving this need to really turn up the dial on following the rules and accuracy and maybe precision and checking things. What's going on for you right now with that one? Turn it into a conversation. What else is going on? Oh, okay, that's interesting. Sometimes people get a little stuck, just sometimes. So I'm giving you just a little bit of a deeper level. Sometimes people go, oh, I don't know. Now in that, we only pick a couple of things that's going on, and they'll go, oh, I don't know. And I'll go, okay, just sit on it for a minute. Let me read you some other things that might go with that. And then you might just probe a little bit. So it could be maybe more thorough, more detailed and more stronger in follow-up. Could you be chasing someone else for their quality of work? More accepting of rules. Have you had some more rules imposed on you that you've just been more accepting of? More cautious in decision-making, less tolerant of mistakes, and more attentive to accuracy. One of these will be like, that's it. And they will get like, oh, bingo, that's it. I didn't resonate when you said more attention to detail, but as soon as you said more cautious in decision-making, oh, that's going on for me right now. So again, just exploring it. If they can't give you an example or it doesn't feel right, go to here and say, well, let me read you a few examples and you tell me which one resonates. And then go to your toolkit and really read from here. Any questions about self-concept change? Hopefully it's good to go through a whole example together. It's good practice. And again, we always finish with when you say, more accepting of rules. So what's going on for you right now? What might be triggering that for you? Or why might you be perceiving it that way? Again, just asking those environmental questions. We know self-concept changes how they perceive they need to be based on their environment and things that might be happening. The other thing to check is, when did they take this assessment? You can't go and talk about self-concept change if they took the assessment a year ago, sometimes even 3-4 months ago. So if they took the assessment a long time ago, you need to talk about the time they took it. So at the time you took this assessment, back in April earlier this year, you were perceiving a need to be. You need to give them context, because if you say right now you perceive a need to be, you're like, that was 6 months ago. That was when we had to relocate and we were going through COVID stuff, and you've got to provide them context. That's why checking the date of the assessment is another important thing you need to do. And that self-concept shift is harder to do much further down in the future. So that's why we really like you to give people readbacks within 90 days of them taking the assessment. Hence why we don't get you to just profile a few hundred people up front, because you'll never get through the readbacks. People won't get their results. There was a question, how long ago is too far for doing a readback? You can do a readback anytime, right? You can always refresh and do a readback. That self-concept, you have to put context to. So sometimes I will go through someone's results they did a year ago. And as long as you frame up and said at the time you took this assessment back in December of 2018, you perceived need to be, and they'll go, oh yes, that was this lead up to Christmas. And they'll go, I can't believe you picked that up. Now that's jogging all these things that are going on for me back then. So you can always review self-concept. I would say you have to put it in context. So when you took this assessment back in July, April, whenever it might be. And lastly, E-factor. Now, what I should have done is after factor combinations, done the E-factor. So I've probably just swapped these around the wrong way. We can see that this person is moderately objective in their decision making because they sit in that first sigma, but also the E sits within the bounds of their profile. So if you drew a line down in B and down in A, that E sits within their profile. So we say once it sits inside, it's more moderate. If it had sat just a little bit further outside, we would say more extreme. So we say when making decisions, you've got a slight tendency to look at the details, the rules and evidence before making a decision. Now in your toolkits, that's page 31. And it's got some more, if you're more objective, independent of the mind, factual, logical. So you're thinking about facts, logic. If they're on the other end, you tend to be more driven by your state of mind, feelings or temperament. We often say a bit more intuitive driven. It's how you're feeling about a decision. It doesn't mean it's all gut, but you've got a tendency to have a pretty loud gut from that perspective. Now, does anybody have any questions about the E factor? Or any of that overall? Love to get some questions because you're all probably here to learn and find out a bit more.
So sorry, Alicia, you recommend doing that E factor discussion before the self-concept changes?
Sorry, can you just say that again?
You recommend doing the E factor discussion prior to the self-concept changes? Yeah,
I do, just because that decision making does make up their whole profile. So it's kind of needed to pack up that E factor with factors, factor combinations, E factor, because it's like, that's who you are at work, that's how you like to make decisions. And then self-concept shift kind of transitions you into the other stage. Let's talk about how you perceive you should be. We know who you are, what drives you, full picture, but you perceive you need to be. So you kind of finish on that self-concept.
Okay.
Anyone else got any questions, feedback, things they're finding hard with a readback?
One question, Alicia, I'd like to ask is the value of doing a readback face-to-face rather than just handing somebody their profile report. Can you talk to that?
Sure, absolutely. So look, the reports nowadays are very, very, very good, right? They are very good. 10 years ago when I started doing PI, we used to type them out. So they used to not be very detailed, not very well structured. So we used to sit and type out an additional report. Now the reports, it does factor combinations, it does all that. It does not talk about E factor so much. It doesn't look at the response rate. It doesn't look at self-concept change. I have a CEO who did a lot of readbacks to his immediate team. He had about 20, 23 staff, and he actually took the time and did all the readbacks. And he said to me, Alicia, that was the best experience purely because, number one, I got to truly connect with them at a deeper level, and I thought I knew everybody. it also helped me work out, and through conversation, that there were some tiny changes we needed to make to their role, to their team, to some of their duties, maybe a project they were working on, and some of the challenges they were facing. And I didn't know any of that until I sat down and did a readback. So for you as managers and leaders in your business, this is like the greatest gift anybody has ever given you, because you get to go in and have a deep connecting conversation with a colleague. And that's, we always talk about trust in workplaces. How do we build more trust with our managers, with our teams? This is the best exercise to help you build trust. It's like, oh my God, my manager understands that about me. And now they want to talk to me about how we can leverage that and how they really do understand me. I'm telling you, it is just so powerful. It's very different to getting their results. Getting their results is good for self-awareness. Yep, it's going to give them that. They're going to read it. But remember, they're so accurate. People read it and go, yeah, that's right. Now what? Your job is to help them go, okay, well, now what? Let's talk about the business context. How are we going to use this really great information about you to make sure you're in the right job, to make sure you're focusing on the right things, to coach you through any cautions that come out in your development plan, to make sure I'm managing you properly based on your management strategy guide. So all the value is actually in everything else that's attached to this insight. And that's where we have to remember the business context. It's always about, how does this impact life at work? It's not just great, that felt good. It's about, great, that felt good, but now what do we do with it? Let's talk about the work context, your development, career coaching. Let's look at you in a relationship with someone else. Now we know this. It's all that extra stuff you get to do with it. So when we have we have those massive organizations in the thousands of people, they often do go, yeah, let's just send out the behavioral reports immediately and we'll come back and do readbacks later when our managers have gone through the process. None of the people on this call today, because of my client size, is never usually over about 200 to 300 people. For you guys as managers, you got 10 staff, 15 staff, doing readbacks is absolutely possible. And it just brings so much value to your world. That's a very long answer, Gary, sorry.
No, it's a good answer. Yeah, so the value is really in the conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And think about, how you would feel if you were getting it from your manager. And some of you, if you're CEOs, it's like, just put yourself in their position. And then there's another question about, what's a reasonable duration for when doing a readback? We can do readbacks as fast as 15 minutes, sort of like a supercharged readback. And then when I'm doing readbacks for my team, and when I bring people on board, it's an hour. It's an hour because, yes, you can get through the information in 15, 20 minutes. We can talk about it in a fast way. But if you want to actually go, okay, but what's the so what? You need time. I mean, this is, again, like, I love readbacks because it's the connection. And I mean, that's obviously what drives me, is deep connection with others. But it's the conversation. It's the, okay, well, you're starting with us and you're coming on board to the team. And let's talk about you, and let's talk about me and my profile as your manager. Let's see what our commonalities are. Let's have a look at maybe a relationship guide. Let's have a look at the team wheel. Where do you sit? Let's have a look at your role and how we've profiled your role. In an onboarding conversation, it's kind of at least an hour. I've got another client who their HR director spends about an hour and a half with all new staff on their profile, because they go through their profile, their manager's profile, the team's profile. So they do a lot in that first onboarding piece. And I'm telling you, it's the best onboarding experience for a new person. They're like, holy shit, what is this? What type of organization have I walked into where they actually give a shit about me? So that's where we've got to, work out what's right. So if you're just doing a readback, it's, PI is a new program. I've got to go and profile my team. It might be half an hour. But if you want to have the depth of conversation, it can be an hour. Absolutely. Any other questions?
Alicia, if I wanted to do some profiling or do some of the assessments with family or, friends, just so that I could practice readbacks, is there a facility to be able to do that but still keep it
Absolutely.
away from the rest of the practice's information, you know, so it doesn't sort of
Yeah,
get
dirty
stuff in there.
yeah.
Yes.
Pretty much every client I have, we set up a family and friends folder for
Okay.
exactly this reason. So if I was you, when you're, because Lucas would be your administrator, I think. So Lucas, basically under the folder hierarchy, you've got 3 folders by default: employees, candidates, positions. I always add a 4th folder under the main root folder that just says family and friends. Create a link
Yeah, that will be
that
great.
just and it's, you can then create a new link. So send out assessment, new link, call it family, friends, say other, don't say candidate or employee, say other as type, put them in that folder, do whatever you want. You guys have unlimited use of the tool. Go and profile every family member you have. If that makes you better at this, then go and do that.
Well, I think just to have the opportunity to do the readback in a bit of a more informal setting would help.
And it builds your confidence, because what you're going to find is you feel really nervous, and then they go, wow, that's so good. Like, how did you do that? Right? That's kind of everyone's response anyway. And then you're like, oh, it is right. Like, you kind of need to feel that it's right. So the more you do it, you go, yeah, and the more confident you get, because you're like, I know this information's right. And that's half the challenge, is you guys going, oh, this is a crazily accurate tool, and just believing in the validity of it. And you get that through more people telling you, holy crap, that was amazing.
Thank you.
No worries. Anybody else? Otherwise, we filled a whole hour, everybody.
Alicia,
That's good.
I've got a quick question. You've got me there.
Yeah.
Just in relation to, we're doing a readback with somebody, and then we start, part of the discussion sort of leads on to their interactions with others in their team, and what should you, or what are you able to do in terms of discussing the other people's profiles and how that interacts with them? I mean, I know there's a tool in there about comparing team members, and it can give you answers there, but you know, is there any sort of confidentiality, you know, about other people's profiles?
Yeah, really great question. So when we communicate PI, we love to talk about the sort of freedom of this information, and that this is a very positive experience. It's for us to understand ourselves, but also each other. So through saying it's about understanding each other, it's a freedom of, you know, transparency. This isn't about hiding your profile. We don't want to shove it in a drawer so no one can see who you really are. I always say to people, the idea is so that we can help you understand your colleagues better. They can understand you better. I would definitely always have total transparency. Some companies get particularly funny. It's usually more government-y style organizations, and they create folders and you can't see who's in that folder, and well, what's the purpose? Because PI is all about transparency. It's about everybody being profiled in the whole company. It's about everyone understanding each other and understanding that. So you actually might find sometimes that transition in that 1 hour call, or 1 hour conversation is, yeah, let's talk about you. Now let's talk about the team. So you sit in that team, and here's where you sit. Is there anybody in particular that you'd like me to go into a bit more detail so you can understand how to work best with them? Absolutely, freedom to talk that through. People will always love their own results, and once you find they go through their results, they're like, oh yeah, you can put that up on a wall. Does that help, Lucas?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Well, our hour is up, everybody. Now you always know you can ring me, call me, book time in my diary. You know, I'll talk about PI all day, every day. But hopefully this has been really helpful. You know, you can never sort of practice enough. The more you do, the better you get. Hopefully this is something you can go back and rewatch if you like. I'm hoping that actual example can help you work out the language and just some fluidity to it. But yes, please go out and practice. And if you've got any questions, you want to role play with me, any of those things, you know, I'm always available. So thank you, everybody.